All right, welcome everybody. I'm doing double duty today. I am introducing the speaker, which is me. If you don't know me, I'm an assistant professor here in Info, and you'll get to hear about my research project on synthesis. So just a quick aside, since this is the BBL, this is kind of a 6-year update on a research project. I last gave a talk in the HCIL BBL on this project, an exploratory lightning talk back in September of 2018, which I think is before most of you were here. So if you're sort of curious about like long-term evolution of research projects, this gives you a snapshot of like what can happen if you keep working on something for a long period of time. So yeah, what's the goal of this research project is to remove barriers to effective synthesis so that scientists can ask better questions faster. Innovators, policymakers can more effectively frame and solve difficult problems. And what I mean by synthesis is not just like a regular like summary of like a lit review or like this is what people have done on topic X, but rather something a bit more creative where we sort of unify intellectual parts into a new and insightful, coherent intellectual whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. It clarifies and resolves instead of obscuring inconsistencies, attentions, and can help you sort of do a progressive problem shift. One example that I like that sort of kicked this off was this amazing living synthesis from the START Research Center for Anti-Terrorism. They did this Herculean effort to synthesize what we know about violent extremist organizations and like the effectiveness of different policies and all the risk factors. And they synthesized them all into this sort of like explorable table. It was super useful for people in the government department, but it was so painful to do that they change their policy so they would never do it again. But it was incredibly useful. Something like this gives you like a real like deep understanding of like what we know about how to deal with this problem. Another example you might think of is kind of mapping out like a problem space, which might be more familiar to us in HCI, right? If you want to understand like how do we sort of govern AI or like how do we improve human control over AI systems, you have this kind of problem space and you have to sort of roadmap like what are the constraints, right? What do we know about the requirements and opportunities and things like that? And it's not enough to just like know what people have tried, right? You need to know what works, what doesn't work, what are the constraints and how they vary across different contexts. This is very hard. If you've tried this, you know this from experience. This is not an easy thing to do. Systematic reviews are a common example of people trying to do this well, and they're very difficult. They're very expensive to do. People basically, once they're done, they do it, they don't update the systematic reviews because it's just too expensive. It takes a long time. Very, very painful. And I think of this as a lower bound on the cost of actually doing synthesis well, because systematic reviews are actually very, very focused, right? They're typically asking a very, very specific question about a relationship between X and Y, right? And typically a causal effect. And so all the studies are very similar, right? And you sort of like screen out a bunch of stuff. In most of the questions that we care to ask, it's not that simple, right? We have lots of different kinds of evidence, lots of constructs that may or may not align, right? All these things we have to sort of wrangle together. So this to me is like lower bound on the cost. So the question that I've been pondering for the last 6 years is, what can we do as HCI people, right? Can we help accelerate scientific discovery by lowering barriers to synthesis? So in this talk, I'll give you 3 ideas that we've developed over the last 6 years. One is this idea of a discourse graph model that can be very useful for accelerating synthesis. Also understanding from an infrastructural point of view, the problem, why we can't have it right yet, and a solution that we've been developing over the last 6 years. Possibility of integrated crowdsourcing as a building block for growing a synthesis infrastructure. So let's talk about discourse graphs. Discourse graphs are a graph structure where the nodes in the graph are discourse moves like questions, claims, and evidence, and the edges are discourse relations like supporting or opposing or informing. So example, you might have a question about how do we mitigate antisocial behavior in online forums? That's a node of type question. And then that might be informed by a bunch of claims about banning is a strategy that can't scale, banning is effective response, right? All these are actual like claims about what might be a way to mitigate antisocial behavior. And these ideally ground out in empirical evidence, right? That may be supportive or opposing of these claims, right? Specific results from a subreddit or like a trial with Twitter block list, right? These are specific empirical results. So this graph, that's what I mean by a discourse graph, right? Where the nodes are not like entities or concepts, but they are moves. Question. So as I'll explain in a second, right? This is actually a very well thought out like information model, right? So like I'm really glad you asked that question, right? Because if you have that, then you start to ask these questions. What does it mean for like a result to actually support this claim? Like, is this actually informing this question? So there's a bunch of work on this that I'm building on, mostly in sort of digital libraries and information science. We have a bunch of these models that sort of map out, okay, what are some useful ways to organize and like communicate and model the knowledge that we actually share when we're doing scholarly work. And a lot of these sort of like converge on statements and discourse moves as very useful base units. These are some examples. And these models are grounded in theories of argumentation and discourse that turn out to be quite useful for structuring the way we think about how do we synthesize what we know about X, right? So you can sort of make arguments, and then you ask, like, what does it mean for a empirical result to be grounds for me to make a claim, right? And you might attack the warrant for that and say, well, I don't believe that method, right? This method doesn't make any sense, or like this is actually a different construct. And having a structure like this can be very useful to really think carefully about what we know and what we don't know. So just previewing a bit, right? This is why I think it's useful. I'm excited about this data model for structuring the way we share knowledge to enable synthesis, right? 2 points here, right? One, the units of analysis actually match what we need to know when we're doing synthesis. And it's also a kind of nice expressive grammar for structuring our thinking about those units, right? So think about it, right? When you are reasoning about a lit review, you ultimately don't care about the papers that much, right? You care about papers for promotions, right? For hiring, for like, status games. I'm being too harsh on it. Papers are useful, but the thing that you actually care about is what's in the papers. And you often ask questions like, what is the empirical evidence that supports this claim? What are the lines of evidence that support theory X versus Y? What are results that are consistent with this result so I can reason about how surprising it is, right? These are all the questions we're asking that we can't answer with the papers, right? You can't answer these questions with an iTunes or Spotify for papers kind of data model, right? The papers don't give you that answer. You actually need to be able to query and compose discourse nodes and relations. So just to kind of illustrate this, right? People have like quantified what does it cost to run a systematic review and what are the different tasks involved, right? There's a bunch of subtasks, right? Like on top here, you have to like plan your study, right? You have to retrieve a bunch of stuff. In the middle here is screening and data extraction, where you have the papers and you need to figure out, does it actually tell me something I want to know? And what is that thing that it's telling me? And this like wrangling is very expensive, right? It's on the order of more than half of the work is basically overhead from the fact that the infrastructure unit of analysis doesn't match what you want to know. You have to take it out of the papers, right? The papers don't have it on the surface. You have to process it. The sad thing is, once you do this work, how do you communicate the result of the systematic review? You write a paper. So we start all over again when we want to synthesize again. Very, very sad. So I kind of previewed this. I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but like if you have this kind of argument structure, it's very helpful actually to kind of think carefully about, people claim that, bans are an effective way to do it. And we know that this is true. Do we really? Right? Where have we shown this? Right? What are the warrants for believing this is the case? And those are the places where you identify good directions for future research, right? Open questions, things like that. And you can't really get that just by counting papers, right? Confounds, alternative explanations, right? It's like, what other claims are also consistent with this evidence, right? What are other results that are inconsistent with or consistent with this thing, right? You need all that reasoning to really think about synthesizing what we know or don't know. I've been doing a deep dive over the last like couple months. There's like a really beautiful lost line of work in the early days of HCI on actually exploring using these argument models in putting them into like note-taking systems and knowledge management systems and investigating how that helps people think better. I'm kind of like picking up from that line standing on those giant shoulders. This is like a really wonderful first title, right? Theory reform caused by an argumentation tool. A bit of a strong claim, but this is actually an example of like an insight that this person got while using the argument scheme. Okay, so discourse graphs are promising. I would like them to be a useful way that we structure how we share knowledge. In fact, I would like it to be part of our infrastructure. And I want to explain to you very briefly what I mean by that, right? So we know infrastructure in everyday life, right? Like roads, highways, if they're working well, they help us get things done reliably and sustainably. They're invisible. We don't think about them. They become visible when they break. We have standards and like platforms are examples of like technical infrastructures. And so we have some of these in place already. There's been a lot of work on this over the last couple of decades that I'm building on, right? Nano publications. Do you remember the models I showed you earlier? People actually built these as standards and like they have platforms that implement these standards. So if we wanted to build databases of claims and evidence, we can. We have the models, we have the platform, but they're empty, right? We don't have them. So there's a vision of like an ocean of like, this discourse nano publications. And one of the, Tobias Kuhn, one of the founders of the nano publication standard, laments that, at the moment, this is no more than a puddle. We built it, but they didn't come. It doesn't work that way. If we think about this from a infrastructure studies point of view, right, there's this kind of line of research in STS and CSCW that looks at like, what does it take to build infrastructure? And one of the key insights is that it's socio-technical, right? You don't just build the technical bits, but you have to sort of integrate that with practices, social infrastructure, groups of people doing work, right? All that bit needs to be kind of linked together to form an infrastructure. To me, that's the missing bit right now. Who does the work, where, and why? People have tried like non-infrastructural ways of thinking about this. So they sort of like, let's just pay people to do this on a volunteer basis or like, ad hoc basis. You call it the specialized curator model. And people are good at this job. They're good at annotating and like creating these like units, but it's very hard to scale. It's expensive to sustain. One of my favorite projects, Mark to Cure, that was like curating claims and evidence for a rare disease. They shut their doors 2019. Ran out of money. Now, it pains me to have to address this, but people now always ask, what about AI? AI fixes this. Doesn't AI solve this? Been keeping my eye on this for a long time. At least up till 2021, 2022, this was still a very, very hard open problem. So if you ask, you get like the state-of-the-art models to try to like, do question answering or like extract claims or things like that, or summarize a bunch of papers, you get a 30% upper bound in terms of accuracy. It goes up quite a bit when you have humans in the loop that give sort of curate stuff for the models to summarize. People say, well, language models fix this, and they kind of do, not fully, right? So one of the exemplars these days, I don't know if you heard of this, but I actually hate the title. Language agents achieve superhuman synthesis of scientific knowledge. There is some proof in the pudding here. You can actually try it out yourself. It does a pretty good job of like doing these like multiple choice question answers. Like, is the effect of this thing on that increase, decrease, or no effect? And it does pretty high accuracy matching humans. Also does a good job of like writing accurate statements with citations in a Wikipedia style summary. This is all in the domain of biology. So maybe you could just get AI to do it all. I don't want to. I'm not interested in that future. And I think we have a choice of what future we want to build. I'm more excited about sort of more mixed initiatives like AI assisted workflows. And so I'm going to kind of briefly talk about that at the end. But just for now, this is my stake in the ground. I don't want to build this future. I'm going to build a different one. Hope you join me. Okay, so the talk kind of, I'm using this metaphor of growing infrastructure. And this also comes from the infrastructure studies literature, where one of the insights is that you can't actually top-down plan an infrastructure. It's kind of this organic process where there's a lot of like, because it's socio-technical, right? You have these local standards. It's like kind of creating off like the tools people already have. And so they're incremental, they're modular, they're constructed in many places and then combine and recombine. So people who study infrastructure kind of see more of a useful metaphor around growing, fostering, and encouraging rather than trying to build top-down. And that's the vision that I'm excited about. Like, I think we have some things we can do as HCI people to help like nurture and grow an infrastructure. So that's where this metaphor is coming from. Okay, so now let's talk about the solution. The vision that I have is that we can grow an infrastructure for synthesis by integrating discourse graphs into local synthesis practices. Scholars doing their usual practices of note-taking, structuring their research planning, doing intermediate, lit reviews, those kinds of things, and figuring out ways to link them up and share with each other. And then from there, we can start to grow out an infrastructure that's not built around papers, but it's built around discourse nodes and their relationships. This is partially inspired by some previous work I've done on this idea of integrated crowdsourcing in HCI, where I have an analogous problem of there's tedious work that we often want to crowdsource. We get like a bunch of nameless, faceless people and try to get them to do tedious work. And that's very expensive. And for all kinds of reasons, it's a bad idea. And we developed some more exciting ideas around like, what if we connected that useful thing that's good for the common good with things that are actually intrinsically motivating and useful for the individual, and then build a system around that. So for example, if you have like a large group of people brainstorming, it's really useful to have semantic judgments of similarity between ideas. You can sort of build out like an idea space, you can do recommendations, but it's very annoying to get people to like compare two things. Is this the same or is this different? Turns out people naturally try to cluster things on a whiteboard, and we can get signals from that, right? So if we hook up this semantic judgment thing to these digital whiteboards, we get the semantic judgments that were previously very tedious for free. And I'm very, very inspired by this concept. And this is kind of a guiding idea for me. There's an analogous thing here, right? You read papers all the time, right? And in fact, in a bunch of our early studies on this, right, we see like people's local practices actually start to resemble some of the work that we think needs to be done to make discourse graphs. So I think there's a kind of interesting opportunity to have untapped creative exhaust here. The big question is, how do we bridge or motivate from the local personal idiosyncratic practices to general standardization and reliable capture? So that's what we're going to explore. Is it socio-technically possible to integrate authoring of shareable discourse graphs into scholarly practices and workflows? And the method I chose to explore this over 6 years was research to design, because I'm not studying a thing that exists. It doesn't exist. And there's no empirical things to like, we have to make it to figure out if, this future exists. So it's a kind of approach that I did without knowing it in the beginning. And then I like learned about it. It's like, oh, wait, this is useful. And so I used to kind of structure my thinking about how to proceed. If you're curious, like there's books on this describing this as a research approach. And some of us in the HCIL use this approach as well. So yeah, you can think about like, behavioral scientists asking what's true, anthropologists asking what's real, engineers asking about how, and then design work here can sort of like figure out what we should study, what we should figure out how to do, and how does it connect back to like theory and empirical work. So that's where I sit, and I'm kind of following this field participatory design flavor RTD. I designed an artifact experimental extension to a hypertext notebook, and I deployed it for 30 plus months and learned about what this future might look like. So I'll tell you about it. So we built a software extension in a hypertext research notebook that does integrates discourse graphs, and I'm going to give you a live demo. All right, so you're looking at a hypertext notebook called Rome Research. Think of it as a wiki with bullet points, right? So you can link stuff, you can collapse stuff, you can write, and let me see let's start with this page here. Right? So it's like a personal wiki, but every bullet and page is uniquely addressable and linkable, which is a useful thing for us to like play with how we structure knowledge, moving away from just like papers or documents. We can sort of think about creating actual units that we can link up and talk about relationships between. So let's see how it might work. We built an extension, so it's a a software extension that augments the capabilities of this notebook. So we can imagine like a scenario where we're doing a lit review on kids and COVID, right? What is the susceptibility to COVID? And you can probably like collect a bunch of papers, right, as you normally would, and you want to read them and understand like what do we know. You get this pile of sources. And if you go like, write up some notes for a particular paper, right? You can imagine all kinds of normal things you might do, right? Ask about what the aims are, write some notes about the methods. Key thing here, though, you probably want to write down what the key results were. And so the question here is like, how do you keep track of that? And with the discourse graph extension, you can actually highlight the result, the evidence that you want to keep track of and link. You hit a shortcut and say, I want to turn this into an actual piece of evidence. And then it creates a new page that is now uniquely addressable and linkable that is a discourse node. It's this specific result, right? What can you do with this, right? Let's say now you go back to your question, right? And you're doing your synthesis, right? You've got a bunch of different claims, right? One claim is like they're equally susceptible. Another claim is that they're less likely to contract. Actually, kind of interesting set of results here. And then you can sort of reference them here. You might say, okay, there's a bunch of evidence here, but also now I have this new support, some meta-analyses, right? And then you can reference that specific result here, right? And this is just you making sense of things, right? But in the process of doing so, you're actually drawing the edges between things using the extension's underlying parser. So if you actually go inside this page, right, there's a thing here called discourse context, right? Well, if you go here, right, this claim, you go for the discourse context, you can see all of the results that support it, right? You can look that it informs this question, and all of this is coming out from the structure of that outline, right? If you noticed, we had this like little keywords here for like support. There's indentation that's telling us like this is a child of this node, this is a claim, this is an evidence, right? So we're drawing these edges in the background, right? So the graph is actually computationally real, so we can explore these connections, we can retrieve them, we can actually share them, so we can export the whole graph. We can say export discourse graph, and you can export it as a markdown set of files, a JSON, or like a Neo4j kind of graph as well. You can import the other things to analyze them. And immediately you can unlock some interesting features, right? So you can run some queries over your evidence to sort of query. Over here, you can say, find me all the evidence that supports this claim and group it by the location where the evidence came from and what testing regime they used, right? And you can sort of query your evidence in this way. It's very granular. You can build it up these kind of more powerful queries as you go. You can also write an outline, and then if you structure it based on like a bunch of different claims, you can use the discourse graph to compute like some rough sense of the quality of the different claims, where you can count up, let's say, the number of supporting relationships to evidence, right, and display that as a number here. And you can also view it in context. Like, what was the support for this claim again? This is 3. Oh, this has 14. I need to sort of pay more attention to it. Okay, so that's a very brief demo of what it looks like. This is how we thought it would be used. Yeah, that's the purpose of research through design, right? You have a hypothesis about how it will be used, and you go deploy it, and you see like this is actually play out. Okay. So one of the design hypotheses is this idea of incremental formalization. We don't want to force people to write discourse graphs as the only thing they can do. We need to somehow integrate that into the messy, vague work of creative synthesis, right? People need to write like messy notes and like, think through their thoughts and, don't try to force everything into a box from the beginning. So it must be possible for you to add that structure as you go. And that was the inspiration behind this idea of when I see something that I want to turn into a discourse node, I don't have to do it right away. I can do it after the fact. I can sort of mark it and turn it into a formal thing when it's appropriate. And then we also have this idea of like not forcing people to draw like a formal graph, but try to recognize it from intrinsically valuable activities like writing and outlining, right? And once we do that, then we can sort of export it to like a Neo4j graph, a markdown database that's viewable in other software as well, anything that can read plain text. If you're curious, you can peek around at the discourse graph from our lab over there. It's in a markdown export. Okay, then we also have another key design hypothesis that's coming from the integrated crowdsourcing idea of like make it intrinsically beneficial, right? So don't ask people to do extra work, integrate that extra work into something that benefits them directly with like more powerful queries, exploring connections between claims and evidence, and then like outlining in a more powerful way. The ingredients of this, if you're curious, like there's a simple convention for note writing, right? It's not like terribly complex. We need something that can link stuff, right? So a hypertext notebook like Roam Research is beneficial, but there's lots of things that can do that these days. Even Google Docs right now, you can sort of link documents to each other. And then under the hood, we write like a configurable parser to translate these conventions into a formal discourse graph. Right now, this is rule-based, but you can imagine this being smarter, with fuzzier language models, let's say. And the key insight from the design phase was that it is technically possible to integrate this discourse graph work into local synthesis practices, right? You can write close to prose and create a shareable discourse graph as a byproduct. It is possible. Will people do it is the question. So we actually deployed this over a long time, very, very long time. August 2021 is when we launched it. There's this kind of distributed community of hypertext tool users that really blossomed during the pandemic. So roughly in 2020, 2021, there's this explosion of interest around like, let's like think about how we can use tools for thought to structure our thinking. And so I deployed it in this community, set up a Discord, talk to people on Twitter, YouTube, Slacks. There are some sort of note-taking courses that I partnered with as well to sort of like spread this there. They found value in this, and so they integrated it into their courses, ran some experimental journal clubs. So this was the context, kind of participant observation, because I was using it myself as well. So lots of different data we collected over 30 months. We got observations and field notes from the participant observation on calls, talking to people, Slack, Discord, right? There were open office hours there. We talked to people. Design notes from our development, which was continuous throughout the period. Deployed a usage survey in 2022. We got data exports from some of the people in the usage survey. We did semi-structured interviews, and then we did member checks as well. So lots of different sources of data. The overall N is not super high, but the depth of the data is actually quite amazing. It's been wonderful to look at. You get a taste of it. So the field deployment gives us this kind of design vision of what does it take to have, can we actually grow this infrastructure, and what does it look like? We have some insights about intrinsic benefits, some of which were unexpected to me. I didn't expect to see them. And then learning about our design hypothesis for like what socio-technical preconditions we need to actually grow this infrastructure. So something that I thought was going to happen, did happen, augmenting local synthesis work. But people also appropriated the tool to transform the way they did primary research work, which was really, really amazing to see. We also got some validation and open questions around like, how well does this incremental formalization work? Spoiler alert, it works pretty well for nodes, but not so well for edges. And then we saw another surprise was like so many people kind of extended and customized and personalized the discourse grammar, which was really, really powerful and useful for them to adopt it. And then we also saw some organic spread of the thing across tools that we didn't build, which is pretty awesome as well. Okay, so I'm gonna give you lots of details here, but it'll just be a few like case studies. So what does augmenting local synthesis work look like? We had a PhD student in medical image processing who used the discourse graph to clarify a research direction for a research project around laryngeal cancer diagnosis. So he kind of mapped out a bunch of questions he was interested in, like the relationships in questions, kind of recorded some potential claims and the evidence supporting those claims. And then it kind of clicked for him. I didn't show this to you, but the extension also includes a canvas where you can put these claims and evidence and link them up. And he found it super useful to just put them on there and like structure his thinking. Here are the different questions. And in one of the interviews I had with him, he described it as like a logic line that was like very satisfying to like really understand the story of like what the motivation is for this research. Yeah, he was very excited about this. Other examples, we had a legal researcher, international law, who actually used it to really map out systematically different positions from statements from governments at the UN, and used it to write a research chapter and then a guiding paper for negotiations on an international treaty. Found it very useful. This is what it looks like, just a flavor of the question that he was asking. We had a biology postdoc that used the discourse graph to more carefully map out the rationale and justification for different simulation parameters in his theory work. We had a business doctoral student who drew on the discourse graph notes to pull things up in seconds, in his own words, for his comprehensive exam, and then drafted the first chapter of his dissertation in less than 2 days, according to him. In the usage survey, so like one of our design hypotheses was like intrinsic benefits, right? You can sort of explore the discourse relations. Turns out 70% of the active users in the usage survey, they said, yeah, this was really useful. This was core to my workflow. So we can see some evidence that having this intrinsic benefit is really useful. This was the cool, unexpected thing that we saw, using it to improve and transform primary research work. So let me tell you about a cell biology lab. So the postdoc started a lab, and at the time had about 6 students, right, grad, undergrad, lab manager, studying transitions between non-living macromolecules and living cells, actin networks, right, mix of wet lab work, simulations. And he found a way to extend the discourse graph grammar to track new experimental results. So they're the same as evidence. They're just like original results from the lab, resulting ideas from experiments to run, which you call issues, and associate hypotheses, which are a kind of claim, right? So you can map these out, sort of think through, like, let me plan a new research study, right? Here are the current results, and like, what are we learning about this? And it became a shared language that lowered barriers to contribution. So he made a dashboard for people who wanted to contribute to the lab. And you can say, you know, if I'm a researcher, I want to get up to speed on the answer to a particular research question, go check out these questions with a summary. Or if I'm a undergrad and I want to choose a simulation or analysis to run, right, you can sort of go explore the issues by topic. And what's cool about this is the issues are connected to the discourse graph, right? So you can sort of explore these, right? Scroll through these issues, but you have the context for why we want to run these issues, right? You can look at the issue page and it's linked to the hypothesis, which is then linked to a bunch of claims and questions, and you can sort of like understand. We had some documented evidence of like undergrads just like autonomously developing their own research directions by picking up some of these issues from the issue board. Right, and also they use it as a shared language to structure productive research meetings, right? So these are kind of shared notes from their research meetings, and they would sort of bring in potential results or like new issues from the discussion. The lab PI shared with me, right, favorite example, live during the meeting, he created an issue from the discussion, and it was immediately claimed by a student. So we had this sort of immediate forward momentum, and that student had all the context they needed to kind of move forward with that experiment. He also kind of used the canvas to like dump all the results right onto the canvas and make sense of it to like figure out like what are the conclusions that we're drawing for our questions here. And the student he was working with, right, was a bit resistant at first to sort of formalize like these are actual results. But once you do that, put it on there. He commented a couple of times how the process called out where he thought he was keeping everything in his head, but there was actually parts he had confused or forgot about or duplicated, especially for communicating the findings to someone else. Just a quick aside here. This is a fun convention I learned about. This is like a figure 1 convention in biology papers, where you have like a figure panel, right? A bunch of different figures, and then they all sort of like map to a single conclusion or two. And this is a nice integration between the discourse graph kind of conventions and something that we want to do anyway to plan out a paper, right? Once you have a figure panel, figure 1, you've got a paper, right? And you submit that. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through the social technical preconditions. So how well the incremental formalization work? In terms of known authoring, very well, very smoothly, right? It's very easy to just like mark something and turn it into a claim or a question or evidence. The edges, that's a mixed success, right? So it's a bit expensive to try to like write out these keywords and like make sure your indentation is correct. So a lot of people just kind of use informal indentation or links to like they could interpret, but the computer didn't know what it meant, right? And that means that if you were to export the graph, you have these rich connections in the notebook itself, but the actual typed connections are not there in the export. So it's useful in the lab, but if you were to share it as a graph, it's not super useful yet. But you know, many users report like it doesn't matter, right? I can use it's still helpful to me to have the nodes, right? I know I haven't done it properly in this case, but it doesn't matter. I can still click and see them all. I can see what they're attached to. I can see pop, claim, evidence, pop, pop. I can see the things I need to know plus where it came from. I don't care that I did it wrong. So this is not a surprising result, right? This is a hard open problem in hypermedia systems. But yeah, so open problems to work on next. We saw a hint of this already, right? People extending and personalizing the discourse graph grammar. I cataloged a bunch of the extensions people had, right? Structuring primary research, you have hypotheses, conclusions, issues, results, making finer grained distinctions between types of claims, like a high-level conclusion, a proposition, a source claim that I don't believe, right? Somebody said this, but I don't actually believe it, right? Lots of like interesting extensions here. Even extending beyond empirical science, in my lab, we decided to create like artifacts and patterns as units and link them up with claims and evidence. But you also have like, you know, hypothesized constraints, solutions for like technological road mapping. We had a science-based venture capital firm use the tool to like map out their understanding of the frontiers of applied research to figure out where to invest in. And yeah, this was surprising because we built the grammar editor actually as a debugging tool for us, the developers, and we couldn't make it not available, but the users found it very useful. They like, kept asking us to make it more user-friendly, like, hey, can we like, you know, make it more powerful? Can I share the grammar? I want to learn from other people's grammar. About 40% of users self-reported the grammar editor as core to their workflow, and 40% at least touched it occasionally, which is very surprising to me. To me, I connected this to like this idea of boundary objects, right? The discourse graph grammar is like kind of nice and flexible, but you can sort of customize it for local use, but still connect it back to that like shared model of questions, claims, and evidence. So I think it could act as a bridge between the local, personal, and the shared global, in a way that maybe like a very formal knowledge graph might be hard because the conventions might be much more variant across different labs. Okay, final thing, very, very briefly, right? This was so surprising to me, right? Being in the community, I saw people like write blog posts and say, hey, I don't use Roam. I use Tinderbox. But it turns out you can do discourse graphs in Tinderbox. Here's how. Or, wait, I only showed one. There's a few others as well, right? So like in Logseek, another like hypertext tool, some users like got together, scrounged together some money and like got a developer to build a proof of concept like prototype. Some people implemented in another tool called Obsidian. So we got to see some evidence of like the generality of the workflow across different hypertext tools, which was pretty cool. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here. The question, high-level question was, what can we as HCI people help for lowering barriers to synthesis? And I think the vision here that I'm excited about from this 6 years of research is that we can help grow an infrastructure for synthesis by integrating discourse graphs into local synthesis practice. I think it is socio-technically possible. We have the components of this are like some intrinsic benefits for augmenting local synthesis practices, primary research work individually in collaboration, and some of these social technical preconditions. Like we got to make sure that people can customize the grammar, but interop. We got to do some incremental formalization. Don't force people to write these discourse notes all the time. And then we can see that it can be implemented across different tools, which is pretty cool. So some next steps, if you're interested in like building on this, there's some really neat work I think to be done to enhance the incremental formalization, especially for the edges. We have lots of models for argument mining, scientific information extraction, claim verification that can be useful to sort of integrate into mixed initiative systems. So like suggest like, hey, you're taking notes on this paper, it looks like these are the key results. And you sort of like pull the key figures and things like that. Or you're writing out a big outline or writing something on a canvas, right? And you can have a model that suggests like, looks like there's this argument line here, and you can verify whether that's true or not. And then once you have that, you have this loop back to now I can benefit from having that graph. We're actually running a shared task at HCIL starting March-ish. We ran another version of this last year. We have a shared data set if you're interested in hacking at models to do contextualizing of claims by retrieving like figures and tables. Join us. So again, back to infrastructure studies, there's this kind of models of infrastructural development. There's like some recurring patterns of like how things go, how the infrastructures grow. We have like system building, reverse salience. We have technology transfer and growth where we have like ideas kind of spread across different technical settings. And then we start to consolidate and build gateways to link them up and network them. And then now we get to standards and infrastructure. This is documented in like infrastructure studies. We're kind of here now, right? So we built some local systems. We are seeing some spread across different tools. And what I'm excited about is to kind of build more towards growing, linking up, right? The different tools and like figuring out how to consolidate. So we have an active grant right now to support implementation of discourse graphs in other tools, including possibly Google Docs or Notion. And we're also exploring and testing mechanisms for linking and cross-graph querying. One standard is the nano publications distributed network, and we built a proof of concept for nano publishing directly from the lab notebook once you're ready. And you can sort of hit publish to the network, and then it shows up on the network as a thing with its own ID that you can query. And this could then be the basis for querying like, what are the evidence for bans on social media from Susan's lab, right? I can subscribe or like, have people share knowledge in this way. So yeah, so let's grow this infrastructure together, looking for new users, especially for the next 2 years. All right, so in sum, right, this is the summary. We have the wrong unit of analysis in our infrastructure for synthesis. We have an alternative discourse graph model that's very promising. Currently, we're lacking a social dimension of the infrastructure, but we have some ways to do it that I'm excited about. There's a preprint that this talk is based on. Get involved if you want to. QR code over there. But yeah, happy to take your questions now.